Certainly not by my design, but yeah, it's got to boot back up again. All right, good. All right, good. So, and I suppose it's fine enough that I'm speaking again. I spoke last week, and what I ended up working on ended up being almost a continuation of what I did last week. I will run through some bullet points in case anyone didn't catch the stream last week or missed it otherwise. Bullet points, I was trying to build a sermon off the analogies between the first horseman of the apocalypse, conquest, and Jesus as he appears when he shows up on a white horse as well, later in Revelation, and talked about how the symbology didn't hold up for something like that. And the more I tried to dig for that symbology, it wasn't coming forth. I made an assertion that it was in trying to pursue how bows are used metaphorically in the Bible, there was no consistent pattern. Evil people use bows, good people use bows, God uses bows. So the best of people are all bow users. It just depends on who's going to be using it. And thus drew analogy to that and how we wield our own gifts, or if we're a good enough person to be someone that we would put in his own quiver, as he does for reference, in Isaiah 49:2, where he is choosing us as his arrows and keeping us safe in his quiver. I also made the assertion that while most weapons these days are based on tools and just rebalanced for combat, I made the speculative assertion, certainly not revelation, that the sword itself is perhaps a divine inspiration. It's the first time we see one in the Bible is when we're being kicked out of the Garden of Eden. And thus, we haven't had time to come up with one ourselves as the human race. Potentially this is, like I said, why the sword through many cultures, most of them, throughout the ages has still been a symbol of rule and of authority and of power and its strength. This memory that we have of where it came from, that we didn't come up with that one. And they made the assertion that, like in Isaiah 49:2, he has made my mouth like a sharp sword, that we, like Jesus when he shows up in Revelation, can wield a weapon like him, that we have that potentiality to be as good a sword, as good a weapon as he was while he was down there, while he still is. And with that, I will get into the new stuff this week, because a lot of the digging I did was, at the end of the day, kind of silly. And of course, because we are a silly people, we want to understand, we want to see the patterns, we want to know what God intends for us, what he means, what he wants us to do. We want those messages, we want those signs. And we too often look for meaning in symbols where there isn't any. There's a post I saw a few years ago on Facebook, and it's a picture of a measuring cup with milk in it, and it's about half full, and it says, and the woman on it is giving praise to God that he supplied her with just enough milk at the bottom of the gallon of the jug that she didn't have to run to the store to make this cake. May or may not have been for a church event. It's been a while, but it stuck in my head. The image was attached to several comments, we'll call them bad faith critics, who said stuff much along the lines of, oh, that's why God isn't stopping the child graves in Africa. He's too busy making sure Mildred out in Ohio has enough milk for her cake. Which to their point, I get what they're saying. Is God that worried about how much milk Mildred has, assuming her name was Mildred, has enough milk in her thing to make the cake for a church bake? At the same time, we look too often for meaning in things. If God hasn't stopped the child graves out in Africa, then he must not exist. He must not care, and he must be a bad God. And the problem with those bad faith assertions is that God gave us free will. He designed a cosmos and a planet, systems in play that ran once he did it. He doesn't have to physically move every piece. He set up a system that runs on its own. Is it his to finagle if he wants to hold one gear back, move one cog forward, hold the sun still in the sky for a little bit? That is 100% his call to make as he chooses for his own purpose. Whether or not half a cup of milk is one of those cogs that he's interested in, I don't know. I like to think that God set the thing spinning and knows enough of the outcomes that he knows what's probably going to happen, but nothing is set in stone, or else we are not free will beings. Worldly concepts like predestination would be in charge then. The idea that there's only one outcome, that human will has no effect on our own salvation, if that were the case. In my own, again, speculation, I have to imagine God knows all the outcomes of a situation and which way it's most likely to go. But at the end of the day, and maybe he does know which one we will pick, but we still have the ability to pick. If God comes down here and stops every travesty from happening, we don't have free will. We're toddlers in a pen. Not allowed to make mistakes, not allowed to make choices that he doesn't approve of. We're in a cage, and that's not free will. We can't enact free will if we don't also have the will, the ability rather, to make the wrong choice, which makes going to him the choice that we made, not the choice we had to. God is our Father and our Savior, but he is not Superman. He hears the prayers that are going up every night, every day, and it is his call to answer those as he sees fit. I like to think that there's a pattern in the Bible, and I don't have the verses to back it up. Unfortunately, I forgot to look them up before I got up here, but there's Mike James in one of his sermons one time, so with CGI, he asserted and he showed all the verses where God had his hands very much in the world, where he's walking among us in the garden. But as we continue to move forward through time, he takes his hand off more and more, removing himself from the equation a little bit. One would hope, to go back to the toddler analogy, that he's letting us try to find our way until he gets to a point where the world is not going to support that model anymore, and he sends Christ down, that we can go to him directly. But now it's a place where we have to go to him. He's not in the tent. He's not in the tabernacle for us to go to. We have to go to him now. That his motions in the world are largely still finite enough that it is not clearly the hand of God moving things. Like I said, I like to think the strings are fine enough that we don't understand every strand that's being pulled. It's not our job to understand his will and his pattern. Just as easily as I can level criticism toward those bad faith critics of Mildred's, I guess we're going with that name, Mildred's post, I can also point out that she did not measure her milk correctly, because it's not normally worried about in baking, but in the scientific community, whenever you're measuring stuff, of course it's chemistry, everything has to be accurate. There's a term called meniscus, which refers to when you pour things into a beaker, a glass, whatever. Some of that liquid is going to adhere to the side of the glass and kind of stick up a little bit through cohesion and adhesion as well. And it gets up there. And it's an easy mistake to look at the glass and read it off that. But no, there's this kind of gap there, depending on what, water is very adhesive, so it wants to kind of climb up even a little higher than other liquids. You read it, the meniscus, the bottom of this slope. And a lot of glasses at home are wide enough that it doesn't matter, but like in a fine test tube, that could be milliliters off. Chemistry is a very exact science. If things are a little off, baking is chemistry. Now, I'm sure in that measuring cup, the fact that her meniscus was actually below the half a cup of milk line, and that she had been reading off that raised bit there on the sides, you could just as easily say, but God didn't leave you quite a half a cup of milk. I don't think it affected her cake too much. But I don't think, the chemistry needed to be that exact for a cake to come out the oven when she got done. But again, we like to look for meaning and symbology where there may not be any. We like to think that we're a bigger deal than we may be sometimes. It affirms us when we find these meanings in there. And I'm not saying God doesn't work miracles. I will not deny that I had a car accident in high school that would have been a lot worse if someone hadn't yelled my name, and no one in the car yelled my name. So, my brothers told me, I was looking at Kane when it happened, and Cody was in the back seat. Cody said he didn't yell. So I can't deny that something was said that wasn't me or my brothers. I won't deny that miracles don't happen, that his hand is still in the world. But again, we sometimes look for symbology where it isn't. I spent an entire sermon describing how I kept looking for the symbology to try to work a metaphor in like I like to. I love my metaphors. I love my allergies. I like allegories, not allergies. Those aren't as fun. I like a good reveal. I like a good plot twist. But again, I picked this angle that I thought I could work, and it didn't work. So I worked something out of it, but it didn't work. I kept looking for symbols that weren't there. And yet, because we are imperfect, because we are fallible, especially me, considering how late the stream was last week, considering this sermon and last week's was largely about how I kept messing up, I missed the obvious symbol. I kept asserting that we would wield a weapon not unlike Christ if we were good tools, that we could wield that same sword, except what did Christ wield when he was down here? What was that sword? The Spirit of God moving in him. It's the same Spirit that moves in us. It's the same Spirit that got sent to us after he left. We wouldn't be wielding a weapon like Christ. It's the same sword that we are privileged to be wielding. We may not be as good a swordsman as him, but it's the same one, the beginning of that birthright that he brought to us and made accessible to us. It's the same Spirit that moves in us that moved in him. I want to go to 1 Kings 19. You can read along if you like. But 19, I'm going to be reading for a little bit here, starting in 1. Now Ahab told Jezebel, this is after Elijah had done the miracle where he had a whole bunch of the heathen prophets that said, y'all get your God to light your altar. And they did whatever they could, and they could not get a fire going. They were bloodletting and doing their own sacrifices and doing their own prayers and incantations, and nothing would happen. And Elijah goes and takes his altar and covers it in water, builds a trench with water in it, makes it so that it will be harder for him to do it, and summons a fire from God so great that it burns up the other guy's altar too, and then goes and kills if I remember the number right, it was 200 some odd prophets of these pagan gods. And this is right after that. And now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. "I have had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." And then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God, and there went into a cave and spent the night. And just to pause there, the journey is too much for you. And then he eats and drinks of bread and water supplied by the Lord. And that gave him the energy and strength for 40 days and 40 nights of travel. Now, again, it doesn't say that he only ate that. It doesn't say that he didn't stop and grab other victuals along the way, but that he went and ate of what was prepared for him by the Lord and did a much greater journey than he did on his own when he abandoned his servant and went a day's worth into the woods to hide. There he went into a cave and spent the night, and the word of the Lord came to him. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." He looked too hard for greater meaning in the death threats put against him. After all the miracle he had just worked. Verse 11, the Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. The Lord is about to come by, and he came as a gentle whisper. There was a great wind, I assume a tornado that was strong enough to rip up parts of the mountain. There was an earthquake. There was a fire. There was a lot going on right there in that moment that God was not in, that he was not moving of his own hand. Maybe perhaps just of his presence, but it was moving not of his will, if that makes sense. We look for a lot of these things. We look for these meanings. We look for the providence, and we don't realize that sometimes it's right there, much more gentle than we realize. We look for grand signs. We look for grand confirmations of what we believe, what we do. But he's there beside us if we're listening, not if we're looking. Not if we're so busy, distracted by what we're looking into, that we won't listen to him. To continue verse 13, then a voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He repeats his question. And in 14, he replied, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." The Lord said to him, "Go back the way you came, and go to the desert of Damascus. When you get there, anoint Hazael, king over Aram. Also anoint Jehu, the son of Nimshi, king over Israel. And anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, from Abel Maholah, to succeed you as prophet. Jehu will put to death any who escape the sword of Hazael, and Elisha will put to death any who escape the sword of Jehu. Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal and whose mouths have not kissed him." Elijah was so worried about the thing in front of him, about looking and seeing more meaning in the declaration of his execution, that he had not considered the plan around him. That someone who can whip up tornadoes and fires and earthquakes by his mere presence had not already plans to protect him and to bring him a helpmeet in Elisha. But Elisha, we'll go to 19. So Elijah went from there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. Elijah went up to him and threw his cloak around him. Elisha then left his oxen and ran after Elijah. "Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye," he said, "and then I will come with you." "Go back," Elijah replied. "What have I done to you?" And in 21, he doesn't just go back to kiss mom and dad bye. So Elisha left him and went back, and he took his yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he set out to follow Elijah and became his servant. Not unlike, "Come with me and I will make you fishers of men," and they drop their nets and abandon it to follow. Granted, "Come with me," you've been designated and anointed as the successor of Elijah the prophet, is a bit more of a direct message. But again, if he's willing to listen, if Elisha was willing to listen, he's willing to abandon everything that he had to follow. If we're willing to let go of all the things we hold on to, of all the meaning that we want to find in things, we'll hear him. Ever so subtly, but we'll hear him. And we'll follow. And that's all I had this week, guys. Sorry that it's a little short. We'll go ahead and go into our closing song, which I didn't pick ahead of time because I thought I'd have time to do it during the thing, but I was the only speaker, so. I did. You were? You have something? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. My bad, I missed that one. So yeah, the next speaker, I'm sorry, will be Freddie Carroll. I got time to find that one. Oh no.